It's closing time. Lock the doors and head home, but keep your eyes peeled. It's dark out and the only light fixture is that old street lamp that's far too dim to see out past the parking lot. If you don't get home fast enough, you might not ever make it back. These are 5 allegedly true and especially creepy closing shift horror stories. If you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. I love reading your tales. I might just narrate it too. I'm currently looking for stories about being alone in the dark. Also, someone left me an odd comment recently. It said, "You talk too much." Thanks for the laugh, friend. Now, let's begin. Warning. The following story contains animal violence. Too Afraid to Leave. From Abett. I love where I work, and I don't want to scare people away from going there. So I'm going to keep the exact location and name of the restaurant unspoken. I'll just say it's a local ma and pa joint in the Midwest. The place is a great place. Greasy but delicious food, smiling faces, personalities that will keep you coming back. I work the closing shift at this place. I've been working the closing shift here for a couple of years now, and I enjoy it. I get to sleep in the mornings, and it's usually slower at night, save for the weekends, of course. I always work with 2 other people, usually a cook and another server. On this occasion, it was me, Dean, and Tiffany. Dean was a big and quiet guy, but a teddy bear at heart, while Tiffany was a fun but outspoken college girl. All in all, they were my favorite other 2 people to work with, so I thought that night, seeing as it was slow, was going to be a fun one with them. But I could not have been more wrong about that. As 10:30 came around, it signaled our time to start closing things down. Closing time was 11, and after 10:30, we couldn't serve any more customers. The primary objective then was to just finish up the customers we did have and clean things up. So we did just that. By 10:55 or so, Dean gets a text from his fiancée saying that she needed him home as soon as possible. Apparently, their baby was sick and she needed some help. I was in charge at the time, and since it was only 5 minutes, I decided to let him go. Soon, Dean was packing up and heading out the door. Tiffany continued to clean the tables at the front of the restaurant. I was counting the cash in the drawer and preparing to put it in the safe. Things were pretty silent at that point, as the 2 of us were entirely focused on closing things down. So when the front door rang open and we heard heavy breathing, it startled the both of us. I left the manager's office to see what was going on. Tiffany was grabbing Dean by the shoulder, and Dean was back in the building, his back to the front door, and he was panting like mad. It was odd seeing a dude that big, that scared. "What's going on?" I asked. Dean placed his hand on his cheek, as if feeling his own temperature. Then, without answering me, turned around and pressed his face against the glass of the front door. After looking around for a moment, he began to lock the mechanism on the door, which he can do from the inside without a key. "Hey, what are you doing? We have to leave through there. The back door's still busted." I called out to him, still awaiting an answer from before. Then he shushed me without turning around. I raised an eyebrow. He was usually so sweet and quiet. This wasn't like him at all. Tiffany was busy trying to locate what he was staring at. I grew curious as well, so I approached the front of the restaurant. "Dean, what are you doing?" I asked. Then he motioned with his hand and pointed to the center of the parking lot outside. Now, our building was located near farmland, miles of it, which is quite common around these parts. We had a couple of streetlights outside, but the only one close to the restaurant was in the parking lot, and it was really our only source of light on a new moon night like that one. So when I looked outside, all I saw at first was a dimly lit parking lot and utter darkness beyond it. And then I saw what he was pointing at. It looked like a cat lying on its side, sleeping. but then I noticed that it wasn't moving at all. It wasn't breathing. It was a dead cat. Ah, poor thing, I said, before Dean shushed me again, and then finally spoke. Just look. I listened to him and continued to watch. The three of us must have been staring at this dead cat for about 3 minutes. I was about to walk away to finish up my business, thinking this was just silly, when the three of us saw something so suddenly that we all nearly had heart attacks at the same time. A pale gray and moist flash of skin skittered across the parking lot, dragging away the cat with it into the darkness beyond the streetlight. What the hell was that? Tiffany nearly screamed. I don't know, explained Dean. When I went to my car, it flew right past me. I thought it was a person at first, but I saw that it left these moist footprints in the ground where it walked. Then I saw it tearing away at that cat, before running off and leaving it in the center of the parking lot. Of course I ran back. I was still too far away from my car. The three of us agreed that maybe it was best to keep an eye on the parking lot before we all stepped outside. I didn't know what this animal was, but if it was dangerous, it wasn't worth risking our lives just to leave the building. We were completely safe in here, I figured. Even if it was a full-grown grizzly bear or black bear, it would never try to break the glass of the front of the building. At least I didn't think it would. The three of us sat together at a booth at the front of the restaurant, where we could see the parking lot completely. After about half an hour of playing 20 questions with one another, Tiffany was beginning to think that we were just over-exaggerating the danger of the situation. She was impatient to get home, and I felt it too. It'd been a long day, even if it wasn't especially difficult of a day. I wanted to get home, you know? So Tiffany began to press her face against the glass as well, trying desperately to see if anything weird was going on outside. Oh no, you've got to be kidding me, she muttered. What's wrong? I asked. Look, just to the left of the street lamp, just outside the parking lot. I looked exactly where she was talking about, and I didn't see it at first. But when I did, my heart skipped a beat. There it was, a figure a little less dark than the darkness around it. A silhouette of what nearly looked like a person if they were on their knees. But as I stared at the figure, it looked less and less human. Its chest was wide and thin and bony, and its head was rectangular in shape, long up and down, and terribly thin from side to side. It looked more like some sort of fleshy robot. Every second I looked at this thing, I prayed inside my head that it was just some jerk with some costume trying to prank us. But this excuse became less and less realistic as I watched its chest heave, signaling that it was breathing, and I could see falling droplets of moisture from its skin. Sweat, maybe something else. Yeah, I'm not going out there, Tiffany said. I agreed in silence. The three of us stared back at this deformed person as it stared at us. Part of me wished it would go away, while a smaller, more morbid part of me wished it would crawl slowly into the streetlight, just so I could finally be sure what exactly it was. Eventually, I nodded off for a little while, until Dean woke me up. Abett, you gotta see this. I quickly looked outside, remembering that we were in quite the situation. There, in the middle of the parking lot again, was the cat from before, but its head was gone. What the... Did either of you see it put the cat there? I had to know. Unfortunately, the two of them had also fallen asleep for a bit. I scoured the outer limits of the light again, looking for the thing's silhouette. I found it quickly, but instead of watching us, it was staring at the cat's body. I couldn't help but feel peculiar about this particular part of the situation. It seemed to know something, like it was trying to lure us outside. So whatever it was, it had some intelligence to it. And if that was correct, then it was hunting us too, after all. Or maybe I was just scared and overthinking the whole thing. Luckily, things don't get more climactic from here. I fell asleep again. The next time I woke up, it was daylight out. The creature was gone, and there was nothing left to worry about, save for my future closing shifts. We obviously told our coworkers about this. Some of them believed, some of them didn't. A couple of them felt it was an invitation to share their creepiest experiences working there, though no one had had a similar experience to ours. As for me, I know it was real. I don't know what it was, but I'm trying my hardest to believe it was just some deformed homeless person. But even that sounds like a stretch. I'm just thankful that I witnessed this with 2 other people that I trust. And I know for a fact that it was real, but maybe that's a bad thing. Because remembering this experience scares the hell out of me. I still work there, and I'm often afraid we'll be trapped inside the restaurant again. Or worse, that thing could come back when I'm going to my car. Then what will it do? What's it going to do when a stray cat isn't its first target? Trapped Inside, from Jessica. What's your worst fear? Is it way too tight spaces? Being around too many people? Snakes? Spiders? Well, I can safely say that my absolute worst fear is being trapped at work. Because it happened to me once. I used to work at an office building. Think Dunder Mifflin from The Office, except the place I worked at was a single story. I was the receptionist there, and it was my duty as the closing shift receptionist to lock down the building at night, which meant letting everyone out, making sure no one was left inside, then locking the front doors. This was easy, and was basically a habit at that point. It became second nature to check the building, lock the lobby doors, and head home. Well, this occurred rather recently. In fact, it was Tuesday, the 31st of December. It was New Year's Eve, and I was excited to get home. Nobody got much work done that day. Rather, we were all discussing our plans as to what we were going to do when 10 o'clock came by, closing time. Most people were going to bars or hanging out with friends. As for me, my plan was to head home and to see my husband and son. We were going to watch the ball drop on TV. Not terribly exciting, but it's what I loved. So the workday passes by rather quickly. At least for me it did. I got a lot of calls that day. Clients were seemingly waiting till the last minute before New Year's to schedule things. It was irritating, but it made things fly by quickly. So it was 10 o'clock by then. I stood aside and made sure everyone left the building. What I usually do is just count the people as they walk out. Our office had 12 people in it, including myself. So once I counted 11, I would close the doors and lock them. 9, 10, 11. The door shut from the last person. I quickly did a round through the main cubicle area, making sure no one was planning to stay inside, even though I'd counted. I'd been taught from the very beginning to double check. You never know. Once I had the all clear, I turned out the lights, and I went to open the lobby doors. That's odd, I thought. When I pushed open the door, it wouldn't open at all. It wouldn't budge at all. These doors only lock with the keys, and I had the only keys. The manager always left me in charge of them. In fact, I was holding the keys in my hand, ready to lock the doors behind me when I exited. But I couldn't budge those doors no matter how hard I pushed or pulled. I looked outside into the parking lot. hoping to see someone still there so I could beckon them to the door to try it from the outside. But the lot was empty. All that was there was my little car, waiting for me to hop inside and see my family. I kept pushing and pulling at the stupid door, growing really frustrated really fast. When I grew winded, I decided that was enough. So I grabbed my smartphone from my purse and I called up my husband. But the moment I pushed the dial button and held the phone to my ear, I yanked it away from me in a panic. There was an ear-blistering screech on the other end, the loudest and most high-pitched white noise I'd ever heard. I tried calling 2 or 3 more times, but I got that sound every time. I rolled my eyes, thinking this is turning out to be a bad night. It wasn't how I planned to start my new year. I was tired. I wanted to go home and have a drink with my husband. Needed to make sure he wasn't letting my son eat too much junk food, even if it was New Year's. I walked over to my desk, which was the lobby desk. We had a landline phone there that I used for my calls throughout the day. I picked it up, but before I even dialed, that same ear-blistering screech erupted from the earpiece. It made me wince. That sound physically hurt my head. I quickly hung up the phone. Now I was worried. What in the world was going on? Why couldn't I leave? Why was my phone not working? And of all things in this building, the landline should still work. With my purse in hand, I ran to the fire exit. This was toward the back of the building. It was closer to the office cubicle area, so that people could run out of it more quickly than just exiting the lobby. Because it's an emergency door, you can only open it from the inside. Opening it from the outside doesn't work. So it made sense that this would be my escape route. But I'd have to stay there for when the fire truck came, because opening it would set the alarms off. But by then, what other choice did I have? As I made my way through the cubicles, something felt strange. And just before I walked past the last row of cubicles, I saw a figure in the very last cubicle itself. It looked like the outline of a person's head. Someone was still here. But I just checked. Slowly, I made my way around that cubicle so that I could see who was sitting in the chair. "You're not supposed to be here," I called out. But the person didn't respond, not even physically. When I rounded the corner of the cubicle wall, I saw that the chair was empty. That's not possible. I just saw someone's head poking out from the cubicle. Just to be sure, I walked back to where I was before I rounded the corner. Perhaps it was an optical illusion, I told myself. Maybe I saw something that just looked like that and lined up with the cubicle. But when I was back in front of it and looked again, there was no head shape at all. Something had been there, and now it wasn't there. And now I also didn't feel alone anymore. I quickly ran to the fire exit and pushed my whole body weight into the door. I nearly screamed when the door didn't budge. I pushed and pushed over and over again, bruising my shoulder and arm. But it wouldn't move. That's impossible. These doors were made to move from the inside at all times. The moment I stopped trying, I heard something behind me. It was laughter. I swear to God, it was laughter. This building, when you're alone in it, is completely silent, to the point you can hear your ears ringing. So when I heard that voice laughing, there was no mistaking what the sound was. But I had no idea how it was possible. I quickly made my way through the office, looking for something heavy. I ended up grabbing a computer monitor. I walked to the lobby, and I threw that monitor as hard as I could at the front door. Not only did the door remain unbroken, but the monitor hit and fell to the ground, more like it had been gently placed on a mattress. There wasn't a single scratch on the door or on the monitor. In fact, no matter what I hit or threw at that door, neither of the items would tarnish. I was trapped in here. I swear to God, some unseen force was not allowing me to leave. And I was horrified, thinking that it would soon show itself. Surely it had a purpose in keeping me here. I felt as if I was going crazy, because the only explanations I had for this were beyond reason. I mean, glass breaks when you throw something at it. Plastic chips when it falls to the ground. Figures and voices don't just appear and disappear out of thin air. I began to cry, and I fell onto the ground in the corner of the lobby. The lobby doors were to my side so that I could face the office itself. That's where I assumed my ethereal assailant may be. I felt as if I was losing it. Goosebumps were all over my body, and my face was soon sore and numb from tears. I sat there, eventually holding my head in my arms, until I was startled by the sound of distant fireworks. New Year's. For some reason, this gave me the motivation to run at the front doors again. I didn't believe they would open, but as I pushed my shoulder against the door, and it flew open, nearly causing me to land face first on the asphalt outside, I was overjoyed. I looked at my smartphone to call my husband, and I noticed the time was 12 o'clock exactly. Was it a coincidence that I was released from this place the moment it was a new year? I shook my head, put my phone in my pocket, deciding not to call my husband just yet, so I could focus on racing home in my car. I did just that, and I made the 15-minute drive in about 10. I practically ran through that door, to the confused looks of my husband and son, who were watching TV like we'd planned to do. I didn't like seeing my husband not worried, but before I could say anything, he told me, "I thought you just went to the bathroom. How are you outside?" He smirked. "Bathroom? I just got here. You won't believe what happened." It was then that he noticed the mascara running down my face from tears. His expression became one of concern, and he immediately got up from his seat and ran to the bathroom. When he came back, he looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Turns out that I did arrive home at 10. At least my husband and son thought that I did. They said they saw me come in, said I watched TV with them. And just a few minutes after the ball dropped, I went to the bathroom, and then appeared at the front door looking entirely wrecked and different. When my husband went to check the bathroom for the other me, the bathroom was empty. Now, I have no explanation for any of this, but it is the most terrifying moment in my life. I did not quit my job over these events, but they definitely aided in the choice, and I'm so thankful that I don't have to go back there. If you have any idea what happened to me, I'm all ears. I don't walk home anymore. From NhoaWelly. It's funny how 1 second something can happen and it changes your entire foundation of beliefs. Before this experience, I was a normal guy, going about my life casually. I didn't think of the paranormal. I never gave a second thought to the supernatural. The most I ever thought about these things were just scary movies. But the moment I left that theater or turned off the film on my TV, that was that. But I had an experience one night that changed me forever. Take the story as you will. Believe me, don't believe me. That's your decision. But I'll tell you wholeheartedly, the experience that drove me to no longer walk home anymore. The experience that drove me to believing that some sinister forces are at work in our world. So I worked a 2 to 10 job at a factory. We put together plastic parts for appliances. It wasn't a hard job, but by God was it mundane, and especially repetitive. Because of this, I began to gain weight. Eventually, I chose to start walking home from work. I lived close enough, and it would provide a good source of exercise and some time alone. All I had to do was take the wooded trail to the northeast of the factory, and after about a half hour of a walk, I'd be within a few blocks of my house in the suburbs. Easy peasy, and even a little fun. But let me tell you, walking through the night is not something everyone should do. Walking through the woods after dark is especially creepy, and now I kind of understand why. One night a few years ago, a few months after I started my routine of walking home, I clocked out around 10, as I usually did, said my goodbye to my coworkers, and began to walk down the trail nearby. There was a crescent moon in the sky. It was a decent source of light until the canopy overtook it. The trees that rose above that trail got pretty thick at parts, so it was almost pitch black. I ended up having to use my phone flashlight, at least for comfort, if not to help me light the way. I walked for several minutes, thinking about my day at work, planning to call my girlfriend when I got home, asking her if she wanted to see a new movie. I can't remember which it was. Now, I've heard stories like these, the way they start with everything going quiet, how the experiencer will suddenly feel dread. I can tell you honestly that none of that happened to me that night. I was simply walking, minding my own business. The night animals were going crazy as usual, when it happened to me. An unseen force, that's the best way to describe it, ran full force into me, hitting me so hard that I was knocked down the hill to the right quite a ways away, rolling for a few seconds. I rolled far enough that when I picked myself back up, I could no longer see the road, and I didn't know where I was. But I knew something or someone had run into me. I was winded, but my eyes were alert, and my mind was blank. I knew I was scared, but my adrenaline was pumping, and I felt nothing but calmness. I looked around, searching for my attacker, but finding none. I didn't want to move right away. I wanted to see where I should go in reference to who attacked me. Otherwise, I could have just run right into them. After a moment, I was beginning to think it was an animal. Maybe some deer had run up on me and hit me by accident before running away. But then I saw movement. I turned my head and watched as leaves and sticks were kicked up, but nothing was there. It was like watching something invisible coming right at me. I was so dumbfounded and terrified by this that I didn't budge, even as the unseen thing got close enough to grab me by my ankle and begin to drag me through the leaves and sticks. The grip on this thing was extremely tight. I could not pull away from it no matter how hard I tried. Therefore, I began to kick and punch at where I thought it connected to its body, trying to hit it, trying to hurt it enough that it let go of me. But this only made it squeeze harder. I remember the sensation of its grip. I swear to God I could feel fingers. It felt like a human hand was holding on to me. But why couldn't I see them? When I looked up at my floating leg being held tightly onto, I saw right through what should have been there. It wasn't even like that Predator film, where the creature's invisibility cloak sort of glimmers. No, this was like there was something completely transparent. It didn't disrupt the light around it at all. The only way you could tell something was there was its footsteps, causing disturbances in the leaves and ground. I was panicking then, kicking, trying to scream, but nothing came out. I guess that's what happens when you try to scream too hard at once. But what my panic ended up doing to me was causing me to hit my head on a rock as I was being dragged. This made me feel woozy for a few seconds. When I sort of came to, I was being dragged along the ground still, but we were on the bank of a creek or river. I didn't even know there was a body of water down here. But then, I realized after hearing the sound of splashing that I was being pulled into the water. I kicked and screamed again, this time screaming successfully. I believe I startled my attacker because for a brief moment, his grip loosened right after I screamed. I took that very same moment to yank my leg away. The moment I was free, I pulled myself up and I ran back up the hill. I had no idea if it was the right direction, but I ran. I ran where I knew that thing wouldn't be, and what really scared me was the fact that I could hear its footsteps behind me. This invisible creature was far from done with me, but I ran. I ran and ran until I was so out of breath that I nearly collapsed. But I made it back on the trail, and I kept going. I didn't stop until I was in the suburbs, and I was able to put myself in front of an oncoming car. The guy driving that car got out and saw that my head was bleeding. He took me to a hospital where I was able to get some medical care and call my girlfriend. She came quickly to see me, and I told her the story. I could tell she didn't know how to react to it, but I didn't blame her. I reassured her that it didn't make sense at all. I knew that, and that I didn't know what happened for sure. I was in the hospital overnight, then released the next day. They had to give me a couple of stitches on the back of my head, and they wanted to make sure that I didn't fall asleep that night, as they feared I had a concussion. My girlfriend, I could tell, believed that the story I told was part of the head injury, that I was walking home when I slipped and fell on a rock, causing me to make up this story, or perhaps causing me to see things and run away from them. But I know that's not the case. But it doesn't end there. I'm sure many of you have heard of Missing 411, a book series that explore disappearances throughout the country, mysterious disappearances that don't seem to add up. Even so, many of these disappearances have traits in common. And after hearing about them, I am terrified that my experience is quite similar to a few of them. For example, many people who disappeared under weird circumstances were later found drowned in shallow water. I can't help but feel that that was the end goal of this thing. It was to take me by surprise, to end my life in that shallow water, and to leave me there for people to wonder until the end of time what happened to me, but to never know the truth. I'm lucky to be alive, but I still have no idea what this invisible thing was, or if it's still out there. Be careful. Used cars, from AnotherOne. Working at a used car dealership, you end up seeing some things, from extremely pissed customers to some sketchy activities performed by the employees. The things I've walked in on when checking on inventory, it can be quite weird. We had an RV for sale on the lot once. I went to check the RV to make sure it was clean enough to present to someone I'd called to see if they wanted to buy it. But upon walking in, I found two coworkers going at it in the back. Yeah, but that's not even the worst of it. This is. I'm going to share with you the story that I still haven't gotten over, and I don't think I ever will. I live in an area where meth is pretty common, and that stuff really screws with you. With some people, it turns you into something else, like some sort of desperate, inhuman monster. Think that's an exaggeration? Well, get a load of this. Every night when we close, I have to go to every car in the field. There's about 200 of them. And I have to check inside via the window to make sure no keys were left in them. We've got mechanics and painters on site, so a lot of the cars will be moved back and forth throughout the day. It's pretty common for someone to leave keys in there, and it's a big liability, because if someone takes off with that vehicle, it can be a big pain to get it back. If we get it back at all, in one piece that is. One night, the manager left early, leaving me alone to check for keys and to lock up the main doors. This wasn't too bad, so as things closed down, I began to do my duties. One by one, I began to check the cars in the field as the sun began to set. There must have been around 8 or 9 rows of cars out there that night. I checked them, often peering in through the windows, other times opening the door to make sure that I didn't see any keys. Soon I began to come up on this sedan, an old high-mileage tan car that we weren't selling for much. I don't remember the make or model. I came to it, and I remember that the windows were kind of tinted, so I had to really lean in on the passenger side window to get a view of the ignition. And if I didn't see clearly there, I would just go to the driver's side door and open it to check. Well, when I leaned in close and checked the ignition, I didn't see any keys, but I did see something else. There was a man who was completely nude in the middle of the seats. The front seat was all one seat. He was sitting there with his foot in front of his face. He looked like a middle-aged man. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and he was staring down at his foot. After a second, I looked down to see what he was doing, and I literally gagged out loud. The guy had some sort of knife in his hand, and he was carving chunks of flesh out of his heel. I must have come up on him in the middle of it, because there were already several thin slices of flesh missing from his foot. This psycho heard me gag. His head twisted and turned toward me in an instant. We made eye contact, and I ran. Seconds later, I heard the door to that car open and shut, and rapid barefoot footsteps coming after me. Now the thing about that situation was that I did not have the keys to my car, so my first thought of getting out of there while I could, it wouldn't work. I thought about running back inside the main building, but the keys were on the manager's desk, so by the time I opened the front door, ran to the manager's desk, ran back to the front door to lock it, that man would already be inside. My best option was to, as quickly as I could, find a car to hide in. There was a row of minivans next to the woods near the lot. I ran with my head lower than the tops of the cars, trying to confuse my pursuer. As I made it to one of the vans, I quickly threw open the front door and jumped inside, closing it even faster, then crawling and lying down in the back seat. Luckily, he did not see which van I got in. In fact, I don't think he saw that I got in a vehicle at all. But he was suspicious. I saw him through the window walk by a few times. He knew I was still there somewhere, and he was searching for me with that bloody knife in his hand. With tears in my eyes, I called the police, and I waited for them to come. The next few minutes felt like an eternity, because at any moment, if he opened that minivan door and looked inside, he'd find me, and I would have been essentially trapped with nothing between me and that rusty, bloody knife of his. Luckily, he did not find me, and the police rolled into the parking lot just as he was leaving. The police made sure I was okay, and they searched the lot and the woods for this man, though they never found him. They did take samples of his blood from that car, but he wasn't in any database, so they couldn't do anything with it. All in all, the ending is unsatisfying, because they never found the guy, and I was always paranoid from there on out of going to check the cars in the field. For about a month or two after that, I would have one of the shop guys go with me, because I was scared to be alone. But I never did see him again. I'm just happy to be alive, able to tell this story. I know I mentioned meth before. Well, that's because the only thing his blood was able to turn up was high doses of meth. This guy was a crazed zombie, so high on meth that he was ready to tear my flesh too. A glimpse of another world. by 33 Dumbledeed 33. I wish I'd been on drugs, because this encounter does not make any sense, and I doubt any of you will believe it. It was a quick experience, but one so bizarre, it has left me confused to the actual meaning of life and reality around me. I own a family butcher shop in the South. This shop was left to me by my late dad, and it was left to him by his grandfather before me. It's something that's passed down among family, and I've never heard, ever, of any experience like this among my family here, which makes things more confusing and worrisome. I close up at 9. After 9, I make sure all the meat is in the freezer that needs to be there, that everyone's out of the shop, and that things are ready to go for the next day. Simple enough, right? Well, as I'm putting some meat in the freezer in the back, which opens via one of those large metal freezer doors. You've probably seen one in a movie or something. I open the door, and it's not hanging meat or boxes that I see. It should have been. But what I'm about to describe to you, no matter how bizarre it sounds, I hope you believe me when I say I'm being completely honest. There in front of me was a world of sand, and it wasn't like any sand I've seen in our world at all. The sand was a more red tinge, and there were these dark red rocks in the sand throughout. The skies above were a crimson color, darker clouds rolling through at high speeds. This didn't look like my freezer, obviously, nor did it look like anything I'd ever seen before. It was like some sort of fever dream had manifested itself in front of me. I stood there, absolutely astonished. I didn't move as I stared and made sense or attempted to make sense of everything I was seeing. I took in as much of it as I could, my mind struggling to come up with answers. Before I could even get close to an answer, I began to see something strange. A mound of sand that began to roll towards me, as if something large was moving my way. I began to panic and choke for air. I quickly shut the freezer door, and when I opened it again, there was my meat in boxes as usual. I repeatedly opened and closed the freezer door, but never saw that weird world again. This experience shook me so bad that I ended up going to a doctor to make sure my head was okay, to make sure I didn't stumble upon any poisoned meat or something, but I had a clean bill of health. I kept this experience to myself until now, but at least here it's anonymous. So, yeah, that was my quick and odd experience, and I wish I knew what to think of it. But I'm just as confused as I ever was. I don't think I'll ever know what it means. Different dimensions, psychotic druggies, and nightmare creatures. If you don't close up shop properly, you'll suffer some very dire consequences like death, or worse, overtime. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story you want to share with us and possibly have it narrated, submit your story at darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links below. There's a link to my merch store and a link to my Patreon. It may be over now, but I'll be back soon with more scary stories. Until then, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.